Campbell Newman is from the Liberal Democrat Party, former Premier of Queensland. Good to be chatting with you on Flow.
Great to be with you, Rikki. Good day, listeners.
Thank you. Well, look, we want to talk about the nuclear policy the LDP has released, but just before so, how have you ended up joining the Liberal Democrat Party, coming out of the Liberal Party? Why have you sided with them to run for the Senate?
Well, it was a long time coming, Rikki. I guess in a nutshell, it was because I felt that the Liberal Party no longer represented the values that it did when I joined, and those are the values of Robert Menzies, the founder. The Liberal Party should be about small government, balanced budgets, low debt, encouraging people to start a business and giving them every backing to do that and getting out of their hair with red tape and bureaucracy. That's not the Liberal Party today, but it is the Liberal Democrats, and I'm pleased to be working with a group of passionate people who want to unwind, roll back some of the bureaucracy and nonsense and actually get back to an Australia where people can be self-reliant, can actually get the fruits of their labours. And, you know, we could have a whole discussion about this, but that's it in an essence.
Yeah, and I want to come on to one of those economic policies in a moment on nuclear and energy, but Menzies' sort of social values would have been probably different to what we've seen expressed previously by the LDP. It's wanting to get government out of people's private lives as well as their fiscal or economic lives. Is there opportunity on a conscious basis to vote differently on social values to your colleagues in the LDP depending on the issue?
Well, I'd put it a bit different, but just probably to cover the social side of it. You know, when it comes to the issues to do with government, we're about small government and government, you know, being out of our lives and having a government that is efficient and fit for purpose and low taxes. So that's where we are on that front. On social issues, we are progressive. It might surprise you, might surprise your listeners, given, you know, my supposed background. But I actually have fairly progressive views. I've been someone who's been happy to support, for example, drug law reform. I supported voluntary assisted dying. Those are the sort of things that you know, people in the Liberal Democrats also support. So it's an interesting mix. That's what libertarian values are really all about.
Yeah, and so talking about progress, this issue of nuclear power, I guess it depends who you talk to, whether they see it as going backwards or forwards. Your argument for the LDP is that nuclear is the way we have to go forwards on things like net zero and energy reliability.
Well, I probably start from this standpoint. If we've got to go net zero, and I have some significant concerns about that, but just park that for a sec. If we do, then people who are fair dinkum about reducing emissions and actually ensuring, though, we can still be a modern, you know, Western country with a great lifestyle, they really should be getting behind nuclear, which is the opportunity to provide low-cost, absolutely reliable baseload power. I mean, I'm a big fan of renewables. I've got renewables at my own home. But renewables aren't there when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine, and battery storage is very uneconomic for that. It actually can't do what it needs to do. So the nuclear option, particularly with these small modular nuclear reactors, is a great way to reduce our carbon emissions, to actually, though, underpin the whole electricity grid and provide affordable baseload power, which we need. We need for business, we need for industry, we need for our homes and our lives. So we're advocating this. It's interesting to see this debate has finally, after sort of 40 or 50 years of being all too hard for politicians in this country, finally we're getting people prepared to stand up and talk about it. And it's very pleasing that some of the unions as well, some of the unions are also getting behind it as well now.
Yeah, I spoke with the Australian Workers' Union's Daniel Walton not long ago, saying his union, which is a pretty big one, supports nuclear energy. But when we chat with some people who would think that they've made some noise about it from the Liberal Party, like Senator Alex Antic, we speak with regularly, and Rowan Ramsey, member for Grey, whose electorate sits on a whole lot of uranium, they say, look, we're personal supporters of nuclear power, but we can't get a bipartisan, mature debate about this in the Parliament. It just seems they always sort of wimp out, if I can put it that way, on these sorts of debates. They haven't actually moved in that direction in any way.
Well, they are wimping out, and I would just say to them, if they're listening to today, show some courage. The time for nuclear has now come. If the Prime Minister's going to go overseas to this conference and actually come up with an agreement which I believe could be of huge concern to people in regional Australia, well, the very least they should be doing is actually backing nuclear. If he would actually himself get behind nuclear, I'd feel a lot more comfortable about what's about to happen. Australia's being dictated to by people in the UK, the United States, and indeed Europe, who frankly are being quite fraudulent about this. What they've done is they've exported their emissions to China and other parts of the developing world. And so that gets it off their balance sheet. But meanwhile, they're lecturing Australia that's providing the inputs to countries like China and India to actually make this stuff, which then goes back into places like the UK and Europe. There's a lot of politics in this. There's a lot of nonsense. And Australia has to stand up and defend itself. We really do. And that's one of the complaints I've got about our PM and this current coalition government. It's one of the reasons I left. They're not actually backing Australia strongly and vigorously. Frankly, I think they're going to sell us out, and particularly sell out regional Australia. So again, back to nuclear, I would be far less concerned, far more muted than the criticisms I've just given you, if they actually got with this as well. Because then it shows their Fed income. It shows they're prepared, and they really mean they want to cut emissions, but they're also going to ensure that we have affordable baseload electricity.
Yeah, and we're hearing like the National Party, supposedly Barnaby Joyce has got this list of acceptable conditions to take to the coalition, I guess making a new agreement around energy and signing off on net zero. But it just seems that in the Senate there needs to be that sort of push to drag the coalition, like the likes of a Senator Alex Antic. They'll keep verbalising they support nuclear, but doesn't there need to be some more pulling in that direction to get the coalition fair dinkum about it?
Well, absolutely. They have to. I don't mean to be too bleak this morning, but I think, frankly, regional Australia, the rural sector and particularly the coal mining and gas sector are going to be sold out by the government. And what we're seeing from the Nationals is just a pantomime. It is a performance. Sort of carry on, make a lot of noise, but at the end of the day, the deal will be done. And the trouble with this deal is that we don't really know what it is. The coalition used to tell us, going back 2 or 3 years ago, how dangerous this would be, how economically destructive. And now, lo and behold, the modelling says everything's going to be fine. Well, I don't believe government modelling, just like I don't believe the modelling that said there'd be certain COVID cases in this country. It hasn't eventuated. I don't believe government modelling when people like the Reserve Bank and the Treasury say they're not an issue with inflation, because there darn well is. But I hope you get what I'm saying here. So yep. What I'm concerned about is, once this has been agreed, what's the next thing? I can tell you now, Australia will come under immense pressure to continue to do things far beyond any other country. And it's because they're not standing up for us. They're actually not fighting for Australia and pushing back and actually calling out the hypocrisy of these other countries. For example, Rikki, your listeners would be interested to know that in the last 7 or 8 years, US coal exports from their East Coast ports have actually gone through the roof. So at a time where people like the former President Obama and now Biden have been talking about this and lecturing Australia, they've actually increased their coal exports, particularly into Europe, sometimes competing with Australian producers. So that's the shonky game that's being played. I just wish we heard more about the facts and our politicians stood up for Australia.
Yeah, well, what we know from around the world is there is an energy crisis as it gets colder in the northern hemisphere, and the appetite for coal and gas is pretty strong at the moment. Can you just give us the Liberal Democrat Party, just to finish off, you do have MPs in a number of parliaments. It's not as though you're some sort of new operation that's just popped up overnight.
No, the Lib Dems have been around for about 20 years. Currently we have David Limbrick and Tim Quilty, who I know you know and talk to often, in the Victorian Parliament. We did have a young bloke over in WA who unfortunately lost his seat at the last election, and formerly we had Senator Larnhelm in the Senate until the last election. So, we've got that presence, we've got the history. What we're now doing is trying to demonstrate to people that the Liberal Democrats have come of age. They've been a micro party in the past, but we're now offering real leadership. We're trying to get across to people that the Liberal Party really have abandoned their values. And you go to their website and you look at their values, supposed values, you then compare what that says to what they've actually done while being in government. It's chalk and cheese. So there is an alternative for people. I mean, as a Queenslander, an example for the rural people who might be listening, they promised us, the Coalition, 8 years ago, dams and irrigation schemes. Nothing's been built. Nothing's been built, Rikki, at all. They talk, they don't deliver. I'm in business myself. I've just seen over the last 7 years I've been in business, more and more red tape from the ATO, from the Australian Securities and Investment Commission. It just piles on year after year. And your listeners who are involved in small business will know that's the case. And that's under a coalition government. Final one on this, we've got the Federal Education Minister, Alan Tudge, today in the Australian newspaper saying that he's really concerned about the curriculum for our kids in our schools, about social engineering and people not being taught to support Australia. Well, he's trying to make out, mate, that it's like he's the opposition education minister. They've been in charge for 15 of the last 20 years. If there's a problem, I'm sad to say it's the problem created by my former party, the Liberal Party.
Well,
they've failed Australia, and enough's enough. That's why we're asking people to get behind the Liberal Democrats, who will be a force against these sorts of things.
Well, Campbell Newman, you're certainly a good advocate for a whole range of policies for the LDP. Where can people read more about the policies of the Liberal Democrats?
Well, Rikki, they would ask them to go to the Lib Dems website, so www.libdems.org.au, and we will be releasing a very exciting policy manifesto in the not-too-distant future, which will cover 10 key areas that we think should be approached to really save Australia, frankly. So we'd urge people to keep an eye on that website.
All right, Campbell Newman, thank you so much for your time today. Much appreciated.
Thanks for the opportunity, Rikki, and thanks, listeners.